Hannah Murray on TRE in the afternoon.
Good afternoon. Joining us on the line now is Dr. Sunita Sah, an award-winning professor at Cornell University and an expert in organizational psychology. Her book, Defy, is about the power of no in a world that demands yes. It looks at why it's so hard to speak up, even when we know something is wrong. It's a profound analysis of why we often say yes when we shouldn't and how to say no when it matters most. Welcome to the show, Sunita.
Hello there. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you with us. And what a fascinating subject. What made you want to look into it in such depth?
Well, the book is really an accumulation of my life's work. So it started from sort of my personal experience, and then I decided to do sort of professional research in this. So when I was a child, I was known for being an obedient daughter and a student. And I remember asking my dad at one point, what does my name Sunita mean? And he said, oh, in Sanskrit, Sunita means good. And mostly I lived up to that. I did what I was told. I got up when I was told to, went to school on time, did all my homework as expected. And I even had my hair cut the way my parents insisted, because these were the messages I received, not just from parents, but also from teachers and the community, that to be good meant to be polite, to fit in, to obey, to be compliant. And we often teach our children these messages, perhaps especially girls. They're often expected to comply. And we end up equating compliance with being good and defiance with being bad. And even though I was so compliant, I was fascinated by people that could be defiant. And my best friend at high school was somebody who could just speak her mind. She knew who she was, and she wasn't defiant for the sake of being defiant. She just acted her values. And I wanted to study that in more depth. And in the research that I delved into, I saw that this essence of being so compliant can cause us serious problems. And that's when I became really concerned about how compliant we are as a society. Even though we think that we're free thinking, that we have lots of agency, we end up being so socialized to comply. It becomes very difficult to speak up and defy and do something different when we need to.
Yeah. Oh, it's so true. And it goes into adulthood as well. I think I remember seeing it a lot during the pandemic, when there were all these rules put in place that none of us were used to. And I found it really fascinating at the time that the people who were like, just do what you're told, and were just quite happy to be given rules, did what they were told, never questioned anything, certainly never broke any rules, because, you know, that was obviously seen as a bad thing. And other people who were asking questions about the rules and saying, well, why are we being told this? This doesn't really make sense. And how is this helping us? And, you know, asking questions, and they were seen as naughty and wrong by the people who were just doing what they were told. I thought it was a really fascinating time for that.
Yes, I mean, certainly we put rule following along those lines of chronic compliance. And again, it's seen as being good. Sometimes it is. Like, we sometimes need cooperation in society for a society to function. But just complete compliance, and especially blind compliance without questioning, can be extremely harmful. And in some of the research that I looked into, I just saw such high levels of compliance with really bad advice. When I conducted studies and I gave people a choice between, you can take A or B, and just presented it like that, over 90% of people, 95% of people would take option A because it was clearly superior. But when they were just given the advice to take option B, we would see that they would take it, even though their private preference was to take option A. And if they had an opportunity to change their mind in private, that they would. So we're just following orders. And when it comes to life and death situations, for example, one study found that 9 out of 10 healthcare workers, most of them nurses, feel too uncomfortable to speak up when they see a colleague or a physician making an error. That's when we notice how ingrained this essence of compliance is.
Yeah. People don't want to be seen to be causing a fuss, do they?
Exactly. Yeah. We want to be polite and agreeable and compliant. And I started to wonder, is it sometimes bad to be so good? And what do we actually sacrifice by trying to be so compliant?
Yeah. And what's the difference between compliance and consent? Because they can be quite similar, I think.
Well, they're often conflated together, but they're actually fundamentally different from each other. So my first career in the UK was as a medical doctor, and that was mainly due to compliance to expectations. I had the grades. It was the best thing you could do, so I went along with it before I turned into an organizational psychologist. But what I think is really useful is to take the definition of informed consent in medicine and apply it to other decisions we make in our lives. Because when we think about compliance is merely going along with something. It's usually imposed by something external, the situation, an order, or even internalized society's values. But consent is quite different, and it requires 5 elements. So the first one is that you need capacity or competence. So you're not under the influence of drugs or alcohol, or you're not too sick to make a decision. The second one is that you need knowledge. So you need to be given correct information about the decision that you're about to make. But it's not just about having access to that information. You need a thorough understanding of it, of the risks, the benefits, the alternatives, the costs, all of those things. So if you have the capacity, the knowledge, and the understanding, then the fourth element is the freedom to say no. Because if you don't have the freedom to say no, then you're merely complying. It's not consent. And if you do have the freedom to say no, and all 4 elements are there, the fifth element is your authorization. Consent is your authorization of your deeply held values. So it's an active expression of that. It's radically different from compliance.
Yeah. And you talk about some serious subjects in the book that show that, whether it's corporate corruption, things that can happen in a workplace, to sexual abuse, obviously, which is, we hear consent, the importance of consent when it comes to sex and situations like that.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why we really need to change our understanding of what consent actually is to adopt these elements. It's not the same as compliance. And we also need to understand what defiance is, because I believe it's been misinterpreted as something bad, something loud, something aggressive, something violent, and that you need to have a particular personality. And all of those things are myths. You don't need to have a particular personality. It's just a skill set of how can you say no to something when your values don't align with that. You can have quiet defiance. You can defy in your own unique way that feels natural to you and not uncomfortable, and with far less angst than we used to have if we practice it as a skill set rather than thinking it's something bad and wrong and not polite. If we think if it's all those things, then it becomes very difficult for us to learn how to defy when we absolutely need to.
Yeah. And you also mention some people in history famous for defying things, such as Rosa Parks, which thank goodness for her and what she did.
Yes, absolutely. And one of the fascinating things about Rosa Parks is that, she complied many times with segregation laws on the bus before she decided to say her famous no. So if we think about our acts of defiance, if we've been compliant in the past, it doesn't really matter, right? We learn from that. The most powerful acts of defiance are often preceded by hundreds of moments of compliance before we figure out this is the right time and this is the right place for us to defy. And it only takes one person to really make a big difference.
Yeah, for sure. You also talk about false defiance and the idea of defying something when you don't really want to, get in the same way that you could be compliant to something. You can also defy something when you don't really want to, like getting swept up in the crowd, going to a political protest that you don't really believe in, these kind of things.
Yes, that can definitely happen. So, I think both consent and defiance, true consent, true defiance, are two sides of the same coin. And compliance and false defiance are actually quite similar to each other as well. And by false defiance, if we're talking about a true yes or consent, it has to have those 5 elements. The same with defiance. You also need capacity, knowledge, understanding, the freedom to make that decision, and your authorization to have true defiance. If you're just going along to a march or a protest because all your friends are going, then or if you're doing something for performative reasons, such as like the likes that you get on social media, I classify that as false defiance because, again, it's not coming from within, it's coming from something external. And a good way to understand this is if you have children, especially a teenager. I remember when my son was at this particular phase where when I would ask him to do something, he would do the exact opposite of it just because I asked him to. Now, some people could say that's defiance, and it's certainly oppositional. But what this shows us is that he's actually listening very intently to what I want and then doing the exact opposite. So it's not coming from within him. It's still on some external source, in fact, what my preferences are. So that is what I call false defiance.
Yeah, interesting. And you also give some stages of defiance in the book, the 5 stages. Can you tell us a bit about that?
Yes. So I've identified these stages because I've seen them in many of the people that I've interviewed and studied and in other research as well, that the first stage of defiance is usually this tension that we have. And it's that tension between what we think is the right thing to do and what somebody else expects us to do. And so we really need to recognize that feeling because it can manifest in people in different ways. Like some people have like a stomach ache. Other people have a constricted throat or a dry mouth or a racing heart. We all experience it in different ways, but it's really important to acknowledge and recognize this as a signal to us. Because if we just sweep it away and we say it's not worth our doubt or it's not worth us feeling anxious, then we're ignoring the first stage of defiance, that tension. That second stage is acknowledging it explicitly to ourselves. Then the third stage, which is a critical stage, is actually communicating that tension to someone else or escalating it, vocalizing it externally. And why this is a critical stage is that once you have done that, you've changed the environment a little bit, and also you have expressed it, so it becomes very difficult for you to say later on you were fine with it to begin with. That cognitive dissonance that psychologists talk about, that I was fine with it all along, is not easy to do once you've expressed it externally. So that stage 3 is you can still be in a subservient position. You're just asking questions like, what do you mean by that? Oh, I feel uncomfortable with this direction. Have you considered this? It's just asking for clarification and increasing that aspect of knowledge and understanding. If when you feel that you have the knowledge and the understanding, then stage 4 is escalating that to a threat of non-compliance, that I can't go along with this. And stage 5 is your final act of defiance. And what I've noticed that is fascinating is that if you can get to that final stage, that tension that I spoke about in stage 1, it just dissipates. It melts away. And there is more joy, more authenticity. You're living a more honest life. And it's just a burden that's relieved rather than keeping that tension, trying to sweep it away, but it coming back as resentment or even like chronic inflammation. It stays with us if we are constantly bowing our heads to other people.
Yeah. How do we know when it's the right time to be defiant and when we shouldn't, and we should just, you say in the book, how many times have you wanted to object, disagree or opt out of something but ended up swallowing your words, shaking your head and just going along? Surely there are times when we should just go along with it, or is the message that we should never?
Now, of course, there's a time and a place. And the two questions I see people asking when they're deciding whether to defy or not is it safe for me to defy, and will it be effective? Because if it's not safe, people don't tend to speak up. And like when we talk about safety, it could be in multiple dimensions. So it could be physical safety. It could be psychological safety, financial safety. I don't want to speak up at work because it might cost me my job, or I don't want to speak up in this particular, it might cost me a relationship. So we're thinking about safety from all of those different angles. And we're also thinking about, is it going to be effective? So in one of my research studies where I interviewed both nurses and nurse managers, what I found with the nurses is that they will talk about fear. Yeah, they will definitely talk about safety and repercussions for their job if they speak up. But they'll also say, I'm actually not afraid of speaking up, but I've done it so many times and nothing changes that I've given up. So they're the two main questions that we ask. And they're actually deeply personal questions, right? It's up to the individual as to what they assess as being safe enough and effective enough, because we could use them as rationalizations never to say anything at all. But if you go back, like if we think about Rosa Parks, was it safe for her to speak up? Absolutely not. She was receiving death threats. She received death threats after she said no. But for her, connecting with her values of equality and everyone being treated the same was worth it for her to speak up in that situation. So that was her calculus. And she knew at that particular time it could be effective. So it was strategic as well. It wasn't just because she was tired, as some people think that she was tired after a long day of work. That's a misconception. She was actually making a conscious decision. And yes, it was based on emotion, but it wasn't done emotionally. It was, this is the right time and place for me to speak up. And those decisions are deeply personal. We have to decide what we're connecting with our values and whether this is the right time and the right place.
Yeah. It's interesting what you said earlier about you can be compliant with something for many, many times or many, many years. And then you can just suddenly go, you know what, this isn't right, or I don't feel okay about this anymore. Your opinion can change. It's not necessarily that you've been compliant and haven't wanted to be. You can just decide that you don't want to anymore or disagree with the situation.
Yeah, I mean, there's numerous reasons why we don't defy when we want to. And that's because we often feel enormous pressure to go along with other people, or we don't really understand what compliance, consent, and defiance are. And then the third reason is that once we decide to defy, we don't exactly know how. We don't have the skill set to do it, and we don't know how to develop it. And so, yes, you could have complied many times before and been practicing privately, rehearsing, how can I actually defy in this situation? And using some of the tools that I've found that are very helpful for people to get to the point where they can start feeling comfortable to defy.
Yeah, it's a fascinating subject. If people want to get a copy of Defy, it's available on our website, TRE.radio, and it's by Dr. Sunita Sah, who we've been chatting with today. Sunita, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. It was wonderful to be here.